Hi, everybody. And I think we're going to start soon because there's a lot of content to talk about and show. So I'd like to provide you as much information as possible. Well, first, thank you for being here on the last hour of GDC 2013. I feel very privileged to be here with you. This is my first talk, creating an emotionally engaging camera in Tomb Raider. My name is Remi Lacoste. I'm lead camera designer at Crystal Dynamics. First of all, I would like to thank Josh Harrison, my co-camera designer, which is in the crowd, and my camera programmer, Brian Lee. I came back from Montreal. I moved from Montreal 3 years ago to work on the reboot of Tomb Raider. Prior to that, I worked on other projects as a camera designer, projects like Prince of Persia, The Sands of Time, the trilogy, Assassin's Creed, Wet, and I've studied in photography. I have a background in film production and in film studies. Even during my film production, I always try to experiment with cameras, with editing, and with storytelling. It's been always important to me, and that's the reason why I moved to game design, because I felt that going in video game was a way to explore a new medium. Now going back to Tomb Raider, I would like to know how many of you didn't play the game. Whoa, it's about time you go get your copy. Not now, though, after the talk, please. So how many of you played the game? Just keep your hands up if you finished the game. OK. I'm going to show you a few examples of what I'm going to be talking about during the next 45, 50 minutes. It's not going to be any spoilers, so be warned, nothing's going to be ruined in your experience. It's not going to be a world premiere trailer, but mostly a few examples of some camera techniques that I've been using while making Tomb Raider. Thank you.
Stop! Stop!
That tower better work after all this.
Thank you. The rest of my talk is going to be about how the camera plays a prominent role in the reboot of Tomb Raider, but also in every video game. How an engaging camera makes the player more emotionally involved and therefore more active. What camera systems we used and how they could help you build a better game. And finally, what are the lessons we learned throughout the production of Tomb Raider? But first, how many camera designers are in that room? I'm curious. 1, 2, 3, 4. That's good. Well, as you might know, camera designers are a pretty rare species. Well, some companies have programmers working on a camera. Some companies have generalist game designers working on camera systems. Some other companies have level designers that work on the camera as they work on the levels too. Dedicated camera designers are fairly rare in the industry. It's kind of a hybrid between a designer and an artist, because as you design camera, you need to support gameplay, of course, But you also need to create pretty cameras. It needs to feel good and provide a nice experience, as well as framing and having a nice composition as you play. Of course, the game designer, the camera designer work with a programmer to work on the camera tools and the camera systems. He also interacts with all of the other disciplines. I always tend to say that a good camera is as good as all the other components in a game, is as good as the characters, the environment, as the animations, as fun as the gameplay. It's a big cooperation. The camera designers need to be early on involved in a level creation process, according to me, because you need to be proactive, anticipate problems, you need to define metrics with level designers, you need to work very closely with the character team when you develop your character, because controls, character, and camera are tightly linked together. But what is the role of a camera in a video game? Well, I think it's a role that is very underestimated in general. I always do that analogy with the goaltender in hockey, or in other sport, if you like. Because if the goaltender gets scored many times in a game and your team loses, well, the goaltender is going to be blasted and people are going to tell him names. It's a little bit the same about the camera. If your camera, or if you have any problems with the controls or the camera gets into collisions, then you're going to say out loud that the camera sucks, and it's because of the camera that your experience is ruined. Well, if the camera does a good job in general, people don't talk about the camera. Why is that? That's because the camera works like the audio and the effects on the subconscious level. So while you play, you don't realize everything that the camera is doing behind the curtains. So the camera works on a subconscious level, but there's many roles that the camera can fulfill in a video game. One of the roles is communicating story. Like in the novels, the narrator takes an important role in a story, and instead of being another character, the camera plays a similar role because it's central in the storytelling. In this example, I'm going to start showing you a few examples to exemplify my points. In this example, Lara stumbles, and as she gets on the pillar, she looks at a chopper and she needs first aid kits. And as the camera zooms in on the chopper, it tells the story of the new objective. She doesn't need to tell any words. The camera tells it for her. In that example here, the camera, by staying close to the water and close to the character, tells the story of the imminent danger of drowning. By cutting to the character's face, you can also reinforce the sense of danger and have more empathy with the character when she's about to die. And the last example is a camera that raises above the player in that example to tell 3 different layers of story. First layer is, the first layer being why is this happening? The first layer being the stalker in the background, and Lara being on the ledge, sneaking into the space. In the foreground, there's another story of the enemies trying to ring the bell. Another role that the camera plays in a game is it develops a mood. In that sense, the camera acts as the soul of the character. Of course, the lights, the environment, the effects, the sound, they all contribute to create that mood. But also the camera acting as the soul of the character. Stay close, follow every single gesture of the character, gets closer. If Lara just crouch because she's afraid, the camera's going to follow her and tracks every movement, acting as her secondary character supporting role. The camera really needs to support every single emotion that your protagonist is trying to convey. Of course, the camera evokes emotions by its position, by its angle, its distance. The camera can awaken powerful emotions. Early on in the game, Lara needs to kill a deer because she needs to survive and eat some meat. When she does it, she's sad and she regrets what she did. So by doing a close-up on her face and then showing the injured animal, it helps to empathize with her and her emotions. When the camera is in a very steep angle and swaying slightly on each side, it contributes to create more vertigo and accentuate the sense of danger while you traverse the beam over the water. Here, the nervousness of the camera, the tight edit, also helps to reinforce the fact that Lara is being cornered behind covers, and that she has a few little ammo being attacked by these aggressors. The camera also facilitates interactions. The camera helps problem solving. It's pretty obvious during puzzles we do playtests, and sometimes the camera is needed to remove useless information or to help focus on the most relevant information. In that case, the camera is going to track the object you interact with and show you that you need to do something. In that case here, as you're prying this object, the camera is tracking the object up to tell you what you're doing. In that case here, let's do this again. In that case here, if the camera was kept on Lara as she's prying her winch, you wouldn't see what she's doing. Instead, the camera tracking the object now helps the player understand the issue of the puzzle. The camera also guides the player. The camera shows the way. In that example here, the systemic ledge camera couldn't do a good job at showing the path around the corner. So sometimes the camera needs to make up for a bad level design or a weird level flow. In that example, we created a scripted camera to show the player the path around the corner. So as you attach on the ledge, the camera will pull back and show you a nice view of the ship and the path you need to take. It also reminds the player of his current objective, which is to get back to the endurance in the background. It also helps to understand the cost to effect of what you're doing during a puzzle. It also introduces characters. The role of the camera is to create a strong first impression. In the middle of combat, you might have new archetypes coming in play, and then you need to bring these new elements to the player. The camera role is to introduce new locations. The camera reveals unfamiliar territories. In that example, you have an extremely long zip line leading to the ship. You're going to see when you attach on the zip line, the camera starts with a very postcard type, very pretty framing of the ship. But as you progress on the zip line, the camera keeps zooming in and getting closer and shows you the ugly reality of the siege of the enemies on the ship. Here again, as Lara is injured and she gets back up, the camera gets back up with her to reveal that new space, giving a new sense of hope. Of course, the last but not the least, the camera is there to support gameplay. I said it, the camera, as the character, the camera, and the controls are the backbone of the game. The role of the camera then is a little bit all of the above. In a situation where you just run forward and all the buildings you're running onto are exploding and destroyed as you move forward, you don't have time to reorient the right stick and look where you're going. The camera guides you while you're revealing the space. In that example is the same thing. It's a high-octane adrenaline moment, so the camera helps you to reorbit and show you the direction where you're going. The camera transitions to a slide camera, then to a named camera, and it helps you move through the environment. In that example, the snare trap, as Lara is being caught in that snare trap, and as her head is upside down, we could have used like a simple camera, but by reversing the angle of the camera, it makes you more immersed in that world and makes you feel even more like Lara Croft. Tomb Raider, Lara Croft Reborn. Well, as you know, this edition of Tomb Raider was the reboot of the franchise. What does that mean for the camera? Well, we had to reinvent the style and a new approach based on the new theme of Tomb Raider. First, the story of a young woman. She's terrified. She gets strangled on an island with her friends. She needs to survive. She becomes a hardened survivor. This character, she's not a superhero anymore. She's grounded. She's more sensible. She gets hurt. She suffers. She cries. She's more human. She's more human. That means we need a camera that's more humanistic, that is more alive. In order to achieve that, we got inspired by the handheld documentary-style approach where everything feels unrehearsed and live. That means, for example, that in certain situations, when we're showing Lara's action, that means we add reaction time when we're filming, even in cinematic or in gameplay. If she falls down, the camera doesn't track Lara one-to-one. In that case, we're going to add a little bit of reaction time to the camera so it feels unrehearsed, as if the cameraman was seeing what she was doing for the first time as non-rehearsed. That handheld camera feels organic because it's always in movement. The camera system that we've been using, the camera shake system, is not based on an animation. We're not using animation layer on top of our systemic camera. Instead, we're using a physics-based camera shake that feels more organic because we can create ever-changing procedural shakes that are adapted to each situation. The camera needs to be more personal. That means the camera needs to be closer to Lara and needs to show things from her point of view. That means we're trying to avoid cutaways as much as possible. We keep the camera close to her. When she's in cover, we keep the camera close down with her. We could show more and give more information to the player, but it would just empower the player. Instead, we're trying to choose the Lara's point of view, which is the one that she's being cornered. So we keep the camera lower with her to feel even more what it is to be cornered and feeling Lara Croft. The camera then is physical, right? It has more weight. It reacts to explosions. Of course, reacting to explosions, the camera reacts based on the distance to the explosion, so it feels more real. It feels more real also because we simulate raindrops on the lens, the sun reflection, blood or dirt hitting the camera lens. Well, let's get back to the heart of the subject. What emotionally engaging means. Well, you know what engaging means, right? It means gripping, attractive, mesmerizing. It means that you're involved, that you're connected, you're participating. Well, why is it so important to be engaging? Because if your player is more emotionally involved, he's going to be more likely to experience tension and suspense. And a player who's more emotionally involved is an active player. We've been tracking down some metrics from the PC version of Tomb Raider, and there's a large amount of players who are playing the game, they finish the game, which means they're more active. There's nothing as important to have a player active when I hear my friends talking and they just want to get back home and play their game every night after work, that's being active and being engaged in a story. Of course, there's a lot of other factors that make the game more engaging, but I'm going to try to talk about the camera point of view. Because I think, personally, if you make your camera more engaging, then you're going to make the player more engaged. A way to make the camera more engaging is to have a more active camera. What does that mean? It means a camera that participates in the action by reacting with the protagonist. In that example, Lara is crossing a bridge. She's trying to sneak past a few enemies, and one of her friends is a little far away with a sniping rifle, and he's taking down those enemies. So like I said, the camera stays close to her. We see that from her point of view, we could have pulled out the camera to show more information, but we decided to stay close with her. So as she's looking down, the camera tracks the enemy falling down. In that example, the camera pulls in as you keep prying the door open and slams. When it slams open, the camera pulls back. Here again, the camera pulls in and reacts as she's hurt to make that effort seem even bigger. Again, the camera pulls in to accentuate that reaction. As Lara gets startled, the camera pulls in fast and pulls back when you get back on the controls. Of course, a closer camera. Thanks to the new generations of games, now the characters have a lot more polys and a much better resolution. I remember working on PS2 games and always trying to get the camera close to my characters, and my art director is being like, pull back your camera. So I was like, I tried to fight it a little bit, but I couldn't win. But thankfully, now you can get the camera closer to your characters. It's important if you want the players to feel empathy, to connect, and it facilitates the identification with your protagonist, which means it's going to make you totally engaged in your story. This example here is one of the first pieces we worked on the development during the pre-production. We needed a character moment, so we put Lara in a space that is very tight, very close, and as she drops down in the water, the camera gets extremely close to her. And I heard, apparently people in the green light committee, when they saw that sequence, everybody just held their breath when she falls down the water, which means that I think we felt we touched something in gold, and we re-exploited that thematic throughout the game in many occasions. So the camera is always behind the player's back. So you're going to tell me, well, how can you convey empathy then? Well, you can work with animators then to ask them to have your characters looking behind his shoulder. Now you can see his face without cutting in front and being jarring. How closer can you be when the wolf almost bites the camera lens? When someone talks to you like 2 inches from your face, it feels more aggressive, right? Well, that's what we were trying to do here. The camera needs to be crafted to feel more engaging. Why? Because cameras that have been created with a customization approach to make each moment feel unique is more engaging. We're working on games, we're working with systems. Of course, the players throughout the game is going to climb ladders, climb walls like hundreds of times in the game. But if you try to approach each of these climbs with a more custom approach, then you can feel these moments feel unique, and then the player doesn't feel bored. It helps with the pacing. It creates a totally fresh experience. If you have exotic moments, like in this case, the player doesn't need to steer with the left stick, which means that we can get much more creative, different camera angles. Because the steering is camera relative, so if you change the camera angle, it's going to impact how you control. In that case, we use a much more dynamic rule of thirds to create a nicer composition. In that case, a simple pry becomes a little different by creating a more dramatic angle. Yeah, the camera needs to be dynamic. A camera that continuously changes its angles, and its distance. It's very important in terms of it's the camera having its own pacing. In that example here, early on in the game, Lara falls on a piece of metal, and she's hurt, and the sequence is played as an interact, and the player needs to press the X button to just remove that piece of metal. So the camera needs to give that feedback to the player and need to show the progression. Not only with the mechanic, but also with the emotion and the state of mind of the character. What I mean about that is, as the camera starts, a little pulled back, the camera pays respect to the pain of Lara by being low here and not being intrusive in her face. And as the player progresses and remove that piece of metal, then as Lara frees herself and get that piece out and scream up, the camera pulls back with her, and it helps to reinforce her emotion. Another example here is when Lara needs to reach forward to get a bow on a corpse that is swinging with the wind. The camera tracking the corpse here with a little sway to communicate the wind. As Lara is reaching forward and the player is pushing up on the stick, the camera slightly zooms in, and that subtle movement of pulling in and pulling back gets more feedback to the player and instantaneously immerse you in that world and connect you with the character much more. Of course, the camera needs to be fluid. The transitions between cameras need to be smooth and seamless. We've been working pretty hard until last minute to fix all those glitches and pops on Tomb Raider. You wouldn't believe the amount of work it was needed. But the payoff is that when you play and everything is very smooth, well, it's great because any glitches or pops would ruin an element of surprise, like here. Or every time you have pops and glitches, instead of being engaging, it's kind of a phenomenon of disengagement or distanciation. And finally, handheld. Of course, handheld movement establishes the character in a more physical world. The camera shakes obviously reinforce the fact of the danger and the rocks falling and the danger of the cave-in. But also, because the camera is shaking and is handheld as she's moving forward, it makes her every step more desperate. Now let's go back to the camera systems. Let's talk about the tools and what did we use to try to forge all those moments. Well, first, there's a bunch of different camera types that we use in the game. I would say there's not one better camera type. There's a lot of different camera types, and you need to use them according to what you need. There is the basic one we use called the exploration camera that I'm going to explain a little later. It's being used for traversal moments. We have, in combat, we have a name camera controller. We have anchored cams, which are fixed position cameras. We use spline cameras for a lot of scripted moments. The way it works is basically the anchored camera is being tracked on a spline and follow the character around. And finally, we have animated cameras that are a little more complex, and they're complex animation that are being exported from Maya and integrated in our engine. There's many ways of triggering those cameras. More obvious one is the states. We have a state control machine that is going to trigger, if the player is in crouch, it's going to trigger a crouch camera. If the player is in ledge, it's going to trigger a ledge camera, and so on, a balance beam camera. We have many interacts in the game. You pry a door open, you pry a crate, you trigger a camera that works with them. Some cameras are level-based. We have a lot of interiors, and in that case, we get a much closer camera to deal with interiors. We also have custom climbs and levels, and we also have even deathfall cameras. If you fall down a cliff, we have a different type of camera. We have exotic gameplays. We have escape sequences. We can trigger cameras with animations. If you're in a boss fight and you activate a finisher, well, at a certain frame number, we're going to trigger a special camera animation that goes with your character animation. So the basic model of our camera is called the exploration camera. It became kind of a standard in the industry. It's a third-person camera. You can orbit freely the camera with the right stick on the yaw axis, which is horizontal, and the pitch axis, which is vertical. It makes an easy choice for exploration and traversal because the player can look around. We call it the three-point exploration camera for a reason. That's because there are three different points, high, mid, and low, where we specify pitch values on which we can apply a set of different parameters. We can apply a different dolly for each of these points. We can apply a different truck, which is a position offset, up and down or left to right. We can also tweak that angle of rotation with a tilt, with a pan, and with a roll. But the parameter that's going to affect how the player looks is the field of view. Of course, if you get a close camera with a wide field of view, you're going to distort the character, so you better pull back and get a narrower field of view. Here at normal pitch 0, we can set different parameters based on the camera point. That means when the camera is looking up, in that next example, you can have a slightly wider FOV, which means that if the player is looking around, he's going to be able to get a nicer, wider view of the environment. The follow camera is one of our major systems that goes with the exploration camera. Basically, the follow behavior repositions the camera to the default position at 0 pitch and 0 yaw as you move through the environment. The aspiration of that system, basically, is to have the player never touch the right stick while moving through the environment. Early on the project, we had people playtesting our game without touching the right stick and going through the space and doing traversal. Of course, when you start doing combat, you need to aim with your right stick. But the few advantages that it provides is that the follow cam makes the camera more elusive, which means when the camera comes behind the player, it helps to avoid obstacles and then much better flow. When the camera is more graceful, it follows gracefully the character through the space. It adapts to the different elevations. It turns around corners. It seems like it's floating in the space. And finally, of course, it makes the camera more helpful, because as the camera repositions itself and adapts itself to the environment, then the player doesn't need to steer constantly the camera to show and to see where it's going. The camera helps providing that guidance. Here's an example with no follow cam. You put the camera in one angle, and the camera stays there unless you move the right stick. It makes the camera more stable, but it doesn't make the camera adapt to, in a type of exploration game like we do, a follow cam is much better suited because it just flows better in the level. It follows you up and down without even touching the right stick. It makes the game much more fluid. We also use the follow cam during the climb sequences. Again, you don't need to touch the right stick. As you start climbing up or down, the camera adapts, gets behind you, and show you the way. The only difference with the ground follow and the climb follow is that we put a limit on the pitch and on the yaw if you're going sideways or up and down to prevent the camera to get in a position where it would be more difficult to control your stick, your steering. If the camera becomes parallel to the wall, first Lara is going to hide the view to the camera, and it's going to make the steering very difficult because of the angle. The three-point aim camera. Well, one of the goals of the aiming cameras is to keep the same proportions of the characters on screen when you switch weapons and when you're zooming. It's always important to me to keep the character on screen, especially if it's a strong icon like Lara Croft. Even when you're zooming with your bow, which is a zoom that is pretty extreme, I try to keep her in frame. And the trick we've been using in that case is as the camera zooms in considerably, we pull back the dolly of the camera to keep her with the same proportions on screen instead of have a big head filling the space or having just partial portion of her head. Can you tell me what time is it? I forgot to start my timer. 35? Sounds good. One of the most important camera we've been using on the project is the spline camera. Because a spline camera allows a lot more creative framings. It creates that cinematic feel. The way we treat our spline cameras is a little special because along the spline, imagine that the spline value at the start is 0 and at the end is 100. Well, along that spline, we can key some values. So as you start on the spline, you can have a close camera. As you travel along the spline, the camera can pull back progressively. The zoom can change, the offset of the position can change. So not only the spline of the camera dictates how the camera is going to behave, but all those animated values. I said that it's very important to have a closer camera, but sometimes the opposite gives a very nice effect. If you want the environment to be the focus, and if you want the environment to be menacing and have your character feel smaller, it's important. In a case like this, with a systemic camera, we couldn't get the same result. Having the character off-centered in a very specific gameplay, the spline camera allows to have the character running at the camera without messing up your controls. In that case here, the crouch systemic camera would have been, the camera view would have been hidden by Lara in that tight space. So we just had to add spline cameras to show the enemy above head. So the spline camera also helped to fix certain problems that the systemic camera couldn't do. The camera shakes, let's talk about the camera shake. So why is it physics-based? I told you before, instead of using an animated layer and playing it on top of our run, we use physics-based camera shake. So it allows us to embrace a more custom approach. By using a more custom approach, we can make unique and suitable shake for every single situation. We can have a shake for when you're shooting your rifle, you can have a shake when you fall down on your face. You can have a shake when there's an explosion. You can have 25 different explosions if you want to. And how does that work? Basically, it's based on a spring mass physics, which means that imagine that the camera is tied to a spring, and that spring just oscillates between 2 points. These values, you can use an offset in position, in rotation, or even in zoom to create a movement on the camera. Then, of course, you can speed up that movement. You can add or more or less damping to create a more stiff or wobbly effect. And you can also change the period of the shake, which means that you can change the amount of time until the shake is going to shake again. I'm going to show you in a test unit how it looks like. So here it's progression of like a slow roll on a long period, and so on. It's going to accelerate a little faster on a shorter period, and at the end it's going to be much faster on a 0.1 seconds period. The damping, this is an example of like a stiff damping, and then after I'm going to show you an example of a lot of damping. The same exact amount of roll creates a more wobbly effect on the camera. So if you mix all of them, you can create cool effects like an explosion, like here. And if you make your time infinite, then you can create other type of effect, like earthquake, or here, trying to simulate the effect of the wind. Let's go talk about the lessons we learned throughout the project. Camera switching. Well, there's some rules from cinema that we can apply to games. like the 180 degrees rule, which if you're not familiar with, when you have two characters, there's always a line of action that's being drawn through your character. So when you film your protagonist, when you switch to the next character, that camera needs to be in a slightly different angle. But the problem is, if you cross that line of action with the camera, you can get the player confused or disoriented. So basically the rule is you don't cross that line of action. In certain situations, we had to deal with that because you were playing with a systemic crouch camera approaching an enemy for a stealth kill. And then when we trigger the stealth kill, the camera needs to cut facing the enemy. But in that case, we need to predict where the camera is going to be, so we want to avoid getting on the wrong side. So we have a special script that determines which camera to choose from based on the camera position at the moment of triggering. So we create two different cameras for each side of the line of action. Here's an example of the finisher. As the camera cuts, it stays on the same side and come back behind our back. We also use that for our systemic zipline cameras. We have the same systemic camera with an offset to the right and offset to the left. So if you approach that rope with the camera on the left, it's going to choose the camera on the left, etc. Ledge down from above. Mid-production, we realized that in our game, when you drop on a ledge, most of the games, the camera rotates and gets behind your player. But in our game, we realized that we never intentionally do that for navigation purposes. So instead of that, it was a case of a player missing a jump. So the player would just run forward. The camera would go behind his back. You need to get back up, turn the camera, and jump again. Instead, we changed that approach, and we just did some much more simple approach. The camera pitch down, gets back level, go back forward, and redo your jump. So there's a lot less annoyance with like all those camera rotation that are useless, frankly. Camera orbit. Controlling Lara is controlling a character in a third-person game is camera relative. That means that if we play with the steering or we orbit the camera while the player is moving forward, well, that's going to make your player steering go left or go right. But sometimes we want to guide the player or we want to show stuff. Then what we do is in simple, we just need to orbit the camera in a certain way. In that example here, we can wait until the player does a specific action. In that case, the player does a saving grab. So as the player presses X, then the camera pivots. And it's not intrusive, and it feels like it goes along with your action. The same here, as you press X and you burn that steak. Well, the camera orbits naturally and show you what you've been doing. In that case here, we had to change the camera from facing the character from being behind the character. So we used that stumble during which the camera is not controlled by the player. And then we can just, again, not being intrusive and have a natural flow, changing the camera without being a problem for the player. We have many occasions where we take control of the player during cinematics and other scripted moments. So we're trying to, as less as possible, taking control away. So we had a few moments where we wanted to show stuff to the player by using point of interests. So what we did, instead of taking control away, we changed our approach, and we just slowed down the player to the point where it would be very slow. And the player could still walk forward or stop, but the camera would go right above her shoulder and track what she's looking at. We had a pretty cool feature. You can tag objects inside the environment, and then Lara's going to pick those objects, then track them with her head as the camera is tracking them too, which again makes Lara and the camera and the world much more connected together. Occlusion means blocking of the sight. As you probably realized, the camera always tries to focus and to track the protagonist's head. So sometimes you have objects that gets in between the camera and the character. Then if you don't solve that problem, the camera is going to keep bumping and be glitchy, and that's going to put you out of your immersion. So in that case, the way we treat those moments, we take that object, in that case, a pillar, and we just flag it to not being affected by the occlusion or the line of sight. So the camera becomes much more smooth, and it flows a lot better and doesn't ruin your experience. Collision. Well, again here, something that could put you out of your experience is if the camera goes inside your character, you don't want to see the polygons from the inside. You don't want to be, personally, I don't like fading out a character because, again, it takes you out of your player's immersion. You don't want to see Lara Croft ghost flying in your map, and you don't want to pop in and out your character for the same reasons. So what do we do is when the camera dolly is getting to a certain distance of her head, we just apply a truck offset to just go just right above her head, minimum amount of distance. That's it for the lessons learned. I'm going to end with something pretty cool, something that I like. The experience ways. It's something we started working on early on the project because we had those hub areas that we needed to load, that needed to be loaded. So we had to funnel the player in some areas and slow the player down in order to be able to load the next unit. Again, we also wanted to create those very character-centric moments. So the experience ways was a good way to do that. The biggest experience way we add in the game is the radio tower climb, which I'm very proud because it's kind of my baby in my project. So the only high-level direction we had from the creative directors was we had to go up a tower, and Lara had to call for a radio signal. So we didn't know what size that tower should need to be. So we did some research about the speed and the height, and I've always been a fan of situation in games where you just run forward on the bridge leading to a castle, and the camera just pulls back and reveals the environment with a nice music and a nice mood. So I personally feel you don't need to shoot all the time or jump or do something to make a game engaging. So we started researching, and we realized that most of the towers had their ladders right in the middle. So yeah, for the camera, it wasn't so interesting. So I convinced the environment artist to get the ladders on the outside of the tower so you can get much nicer composition. Then we kind of separated the tower in multiple sections to tell a few different stories. This first story being the danger of the climb, and the risk of climbing and having a ladder breaking because it's been unused for so much time. Then after, we need to tell the story of getting higher in altitude. Here, again, I chose the bird scare moment to switch the camera to get inside the tower. If we didn't have that moment, it would have felt jarring to just switch to that point of view. With that camera here, you can show where you just finished traversing that bunker in the background, and you keep going up. This moment here was to convey the emotion when she hugs the post and she looks to what she's been doing all that time. The last section of the tower, which gets even higher. Again, it's to communicate the danger, but here in that short gameplay sequence, we reused the arm reach mechanic that we used during the river crossing and during the bow reach. So finally, as you get up on the tower, you didn't do anything very difficult on the sticks, but you have that feeling that you realize the very nice emotional ascension at the top of the tower. Thank you very much. Well, thank you for your time, and I'm going to be asking questions. If you have any other questions, you can use my work email if you're looking for any opportunity in camera design or anything else. Just write me an email. In the meantime, you can get to the microphones, and I'm going to answer your questions if you have any.
Hi, just out of curiosity, have you had any complaints or concerns about motion sickness with the camera angles?
Well, we had internal complaints by our own employees first. So throughout the project, we toned down the shakes, and what we also did is we scaled the amount of shake based on the stick influx or the speed of the character, so it would scale down if you stop moving. That really helped to tone down the shake. And we did a lot of play tests, and I saw among like the forums or the reviews, I saw a few people complaining about it. But in general, if we had complaints during playtest, we would have adjusted that issue. But
thank you.
Thank you.
Yes. As a camera designer, choosing a good story is one of consideration.
You're asking if the camera designer chooses the story?
Yes, because like movie have a camera angle choosing. So
yeah, it's a good question.
If the movie haven't have a good story, even the camera is really awesome, but you know what I mean. Yeah. So the game is the same because like Lara Croft is a very heavy story emotion engaged with the camera. So do you think choosing story is one of your choice?
I didn't hear what you said in the end, but I seem to understand that how we worked on the project basically was a very nice cooperative, interactive creation. So some moments that are very story-driven can be initiated by camera designers because we have cool ideas of like climbing the tower. Sometimes an animation can trigger a good idea. Then it can, okay, yeah, let's do that. So sometimes not the meta story, which is the story that we find in the cinematics, but the storyline that you can find in the interactive moments. Then they can be crafted between the camera designers, animators, and all those specialists.
All right, thank you.
Thank you. Hi.
Hi, thanks. That was a great presentation. I'm trying to conceptualize when she has the bow out and you're backing the camera away from her, yet you're zooming into the target.
Yeah. So
just explain
yeah,
that maybe.
because you want to get that target closer to have that sniping effect. So when the camera stays here and it zooms, then because the camera zooms, you're going to lose her face on screen because the field of view gets narrower. So you're going to lose some part of her face. So in order to achieve that and keep that zoom, that far zoom, we pull back the camera so you can keep the same space on screen.
Oh, I see. So you're moving the camera back.
Yeah, we're moving the camera back as we zoom in.
Okay.
The only problem that might cause is then you have more collision problems. If you back up in a wall in extreme zoom, the camera can be pushed by the wall behind you. But in that case, we use a different proxy collision on the camera, so it prevents at some point the character to back up to a certain point in the wall.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Hi.
Hi.
Do you have any favorite cinematography literature that you'd like to share that may have inspired your thought process behind camera design?
I would say watch a lot of movies or of photography. Basically, I don't have cinematography literature per se, but it's important to get a diverse culture and see
maybe favorite cinematographers that you enjoy?
Well, Stanley Kubrick is one of my favorite directors, and he was a photographer before becoming a director. And you can see that every single shot in these movies have been top. He even developed some camera lens to work in very low light conditions. So
awesome.
It's always been an inspiration.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, I wanted to ask, was dealing with Lara's sexiness an issue? Because, I mean, I might sound as a perv, but I remember my first experience as Tomb Raider. I would try to take the camera as close as Lara to see the boobs and that kind of stuff. And I mean, that's part of the Tomb Raider experience to me. And I was a bit surprised not seeing any of that in that presentation. And I wanted to ask, was this like a real motivation because you wanted to make Lara not this super sex bomb anymore,
Yeah.
and you would like refuse yourself to make this kind of very sexy porn shot?
Well, there is a few cleavage shots in the entire game, but of course the goal was never to have Lara become a sex object. So that's why when in the exploration camera, if you push the camera up, the camera, instead of staying like below her butt, well, the camera goes right above her waist, and it's more flattering for her first. And yeah, we try to be careful about how we show her.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Yes.
Hi. On the note of like someone else mentioned motion sickness, like during user tests. Did anyone report like camera fatigue, like especially when there's a scene where she dies a lot and they have to see this like emotional angle like over and over and over again? I mean, does it ever get old?
You guys asking me if we had studies about emotion?
I mean, I imagine like you had a lot of user tests during the production of the game. Did it ever come up that like this emotional shot occurred so many times during a difficult part of the game that the player experienced fatigue from seeing that shot over and over again, repeatedly?
Not in my knowledge, but I've read recently an article about a gamer that played one of our more QTE-oriented moments where Lara gets strangled if you miss it. And it was pretty moving, the way she described that. It reminded her, was a very personal approach, and it reminded her of a moment when her dad tried to strangle her, and she kept missing the QTE and the game. And then after, when she kept playing with Lara and she became survivor and a stronger woman, she really got empowered, and it was a very touching text you can find on the web if you do a little bit of research.
Was that her motivation to not die?
That's a good motivation. Yeah, well, Conan and Brian didn't like that either. Hi.
Got time for one more?
Yeah.
So you mentioned that the follow cam tries to stay close to what you call the default position behind the characters they're moving, and I'm wondering how that default is defined. Is it chosen by the camera designer or based on the level? Is it chosen by the player, or is it a compromise between the two?
The default position of the camera, it's determined by the camera designer, but again, you can't make your own game. The camera design is so important. It's so important for the controls and the feel and the gameplay. If the camera starts to be hindering the controls or any other gameplay, it's not going to work. You can't, if you want to make movies, you can go in movies. So it's important that camera designers have that sensibility and understand that they're working in the constraint of a game.
One more?
Sure.
Okay. Great work, by the way, up until the very last part where you went up onto the tower, and I'm just sitting here going, okay, I'm afraid of heights, and I'm just going to like close my eyes here because I don't even want to watch anymore. I have an entertainment studio, also have high-tech studio, and you did a great job with all the cinematography. J.J. Abrams and I always talk, and he's like, Victor, I have to go to a 12-step program because I do too many lens flares. You did a perfect amount of not too much, not too little. One of my new projects is acousto-haptics. Everything you see and hear wirelessly, you'll get to feel. Have you guys started to play with it or think about it yet?
Sorry, to play with what?
Acousto-haptic. So whatever happens to your character, instead of just watching it, you will actually get to feel it in an ultra-lightweight device that you'll be able to wear. So when your character gets shot, or whether they're climbing, or whether they're running. Okay.
Well, we use the rumble stick, but yeah, any type of feedback. is a good venue to explore. So the camera, the sound, of course, the rumbles, and whatever new device that we develop, as long as it doesn't impale you.
Okay, so we'll talk offline, and I'll get you a.
Thank you. Well, thank you again.